So thank you very much, Arya, for this introduction, and fascinating to hear about all your activities and also to watch these numbers of the poll. I see it's still alive. Um, so thank you everyone for joining, and it's great to have the opportunity to talk to all of you wherever you are, and you are in various places. What I'll do for the next 20 to 30 minutes is show you a presentation of photos that I took during my research of the Hilltop. I'll start only before that with a few minutes of introduction to the subject. Now, I'm sure that each one of you has their own knowledge of the subject of the settlements, but I'm going to try to give an overview for those who don't know or have the basic understanding. But I'll be brief, and then I'll move on to the photos and talk about how I did the research, what I encountered during the research, and how the research evolved into writing the novel itself. And after that, we'll have a discussion, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that I think Arya will put forward, but collected from other people as well. Okay. So the Jewish settlements of the West Bank are perhaps the hottest point of contention between Israelis and Palestinians, between Israel and the US and Europe, and also among Israelis themselves. It's an ongoing ticking bomb, which the supporters and opponents of it they seem to be in constant horn-locking situation. So what are they? The settlements are villages or towns founded by Israeli Jews in the West Bank and Gaza, following the occupation of these lands in the Six-Day War in 1967. The gist of the argument is this: the settlers and their supporters claim that the West Bank is part of the historical land of Israel, given to the Jews by God and settled by them throughout the years in ancient and modern history. Also, the supporters would mention the strategic location, which is very important, the height, the altitude, which is important for Israel's security. The opponents claim that this land is contested in the list. It was occupied in the war. It was never recognized as officially a part of Israel, not by the world, but also not by Israel itself. Israel never made it an official part of the state of Israel. And moreover, there are 3 million Palestinians living there in relation to between 400 and 500,000 Jews. Which again, those 400 or 500,000, they all came after 67. For the last 53, 54 years, there were none before. Well, in the around 20 years before. So the settlers are largely, the settlers and the settlements are largely seen as the main obstacle to the two-state solution. And they're still very much in the news. They were in the news around the time that I was researching and writing the book. And as Arya said, the book was already published 8 years ago, and it still doesn't look like going off the news headlines. Even recently, if we're thinking about the recent election results, that was also very much reflected the attitude towards settlements, and the representatives of pro and against settlements were very much part of the campaigns. Now, I want to say a few words about the illegal outposts, which are a relatively newer kind of branch of the settlements. They began rising in the first decade of this century, and they came in reaction to different obstacles that were made on the expansion of settlements. And those outposts are usually seen as something of a kind of a very basic small settlements. Sometimes they start with only one or two trailers, which are placed overnight without authorization on a hilltop, usually close to an older settlement. And the conditions there are very basic. They start without water, without electricity. They are generally seen as kind of modern pioneers. They see themselves as pioneers, inhabiting the rightful land and creating a new reality by actually going and settling it.
Assaf, sorry to interrupt, but
Yes.
your audio is a little ruffled like yesterday, so I
Ah,
found it going against your
so
face right
maybe
there.
if I'll put the microphone here,
Yeah, a little further
I
away,
think.
and you can talk louder. I think that would be great.
Okay. So as a writer, I developed a curiosity for the outpost for some years. The combination of lawlessness and the lack of borders, the sense of adventure, the danger, this idea of conquering new land, a new frontier, and the passion that went with it. It seemed to look like the West, the Wild West, a kind of a Wild West bank. And also, more than that, what was going on there affected me as an Israeli living in Tel Aviv, because it affected the budgets, it affected the politics, it affected the violence, the round of wars that we have, the image of Israel in the world. So I decided I wanted to go out there and explore those settlements, and actually go and meet the people and see how the people live, um, and, um, and look under the surface, under the headlines. So I think I'll start now. Arya, I see the poll. Um, can I click it off, the poll?
Yeah, you can click it
Okay.
off if you want.
Okay. So okay. So I start the journey at my home in Tel Aviv. I wake up early in the morning, as I said before, and I start thinking about this idea of the settlements, and I realize that I need to simply go there. So I start driving. It's only like a 1 hour drive from Tel Aviv to the West Bank. And while you drive, you notice changes. You see the landscape changes. It becomes less green and more brown, arid. You see the weather changes. It becomes a little cooler. And then you see those Palestinian villages start to appear, and this great wall. This is the wall of separation erected from 2004 by the government as a response to the terrorist attacks by the Palestinians. And then you get to the checkpoint, which is the kind of the border between proper Israel and the West Bank. And then after you pass the checkpoint, a second, it's a little bit as if you entered a different country, although there's no passports or no proper border, but actually it is different. For example, you see those cabs, those yellow cabs. We don't have them in Israel. We have white cabs in Israel. Also, the number plates, they're green, as you see. We have yellow number plates. And again, you see the villages, the mosques, and also you feel some kind of tension in the air. Maybe it's an Israeli thing. Maybe you as American tourists will not feel a difference, but Israelis notice straight away a kind of a more tense atmosphere in the air. And then you see this. This is the Herodium. I mean, of course, this is one area of the West Bank. It's near Jerusalem, a little south to Jerusalem. It's called Gush Etzion. Aryeh mentioned it before. And the Herodium was built by Herod, and seeing it, you immediately kind of connect to the history, the rich history of the place. You had empires here from way back, different rulers of the land, and Herod was one of them. And actually, Josephus Flavius, Yosef ben Matityahu, who was a great historian in old times, he said this was like a woman's breast rising from the land. So my inspiration for the outpost in the Hilltop, in the book, which is called in the book Ma'aleh Hermesh Gimel, was an outpost called Tkoa Dalet. Tkoa is one of the older settlements started in 1970. And then, as I said, these little outposts, they start growing Tkoa B, Tkoa C, Tkoa D. This is Tkoa D, or Dalet in Hebrew. And what we see here is the main roundabout in the middle of this small outpost of Tkoa Dalet. Of course, the signpost is not official signpost of the of the transport office of Israel, because nothing here is official. They just stole it from some roundabout somewhere in Jerusalem. And this is a look of this roundabout from a little bit further back. It's the center of this village. There were maybe, at the time I was traveling there, there were, I would say, maybe 20 families living there. And that's another view of the outpost. And this, just notice the different architecture. Again, nothing is by the book. Nothing is approved. Nothing is following any rules of building. So you see this kind of what started as I can use my mouse. You can see the mouse? Yeah. So this is, for example, started as a trailer, and they built another floor and a roof, and they painted it in camouflage. This is like a teepee tent. This here is made from straw. So you have all these different, actually, architects view the outposts and the settlements as a very fascinating way to inquire how people create new villages and new places to live without any planning. And this is the hut that was my hut. I managed to kind of to get a deal to use it. Someone owned it and someone was renting it out of him, and the girl who was renting it, she actually was living there only half the week. So she she agreed that I would use this little hut a few days a week. And I used to go here every week and use this little place. Now, the story actually of how it was built appears in the book because one of the characters, Gabi, he also builds a similar hut. And or cabin maybe is the better word for it. So you can see, for example, that the lower half here, the lower half of the wall is stones, and then the upper half is wood. And in a minute, we will go into the cabin. But this is the bathroom, for example. You see the pipes, you see everything. As I said, is makeshift. Some of it is mud, some of it is stone, and then they found some bathtub somewhere again in Jerusalem or somewhere and connected the water pipes, and this is how they bathe. And this is the inside of the hut. You can see it's a little bit hippie. You can see the stone floor. That's actually the stone of the hill. You can see the guitar and the different stuff that she has here. And actually, this brings me to something else, which is this doesn't look like a war zone, right? I mean, hippies in nature, in beautiful landscape, smoking weed. That's how it is. And this paradox, this kind of difference between being such a volatile, such a sensitive area in the world, creating so much problem and tension and bloodshed, but actually, when you go there to these small places, it's the most peaceful place you can imagine. And this is another look at the architecture. You can see there's a trailer inside, but then they kind of cover it up with wood. And this is the different layers, that the kind of the geology of the architecture there, with wood, with stone, with isolation. And then another thing you would see in those little outposts is a lot of junk, just junk that they found somewhere. You have here obviously this oven and these pots, but also this seesaw, and you could see treadmills thrown away. You could see cars that are sawed in half, and buses and all kind of strange thing, and carpets rolled around. This is something you always see in those outposts. And then suddenly you see this playground, and it looks actually very different to all I described, which is, just a kind of a mayhem. But this is very organized, and you have the grass, and you have the fixtures. I want to quote a line from the book about the playground. The playground appeared to have been lowered to the ground by a giant Monty Python-like hand of God, transplanted like the organ of a stylish New Yorker into the body of a wretched Bedouin nomad. And I quote it in the book because the book, the first scene, or more or less the beginning of the book, is this ceremony where the rich American who donated the money to build the settlement comes to the ceremony, and he actually donated this playground. And we also have the politicians there, and we have a journalist there who will kind of start one of the plots of the story. So that's something else, another kind of strange thing that you find in those outposts. And you have the olive oil. You have the olive trees, obviously very symbolic. You have them for thousands of years. You had them before Arabs and Jews, and you will have them after Arabs and Jews. And the Arabs and Jews fight over them, and you know, some cut them and some make olive oil from them. And then the other half of the photo, of the picture, of this slide, this says organi, which means growing organic vegetables. And that's another kind of weird thing that the liberals, you know, like you have in California, like we have in Tel Aviv, like we have everywhere, those kind of advanced liberals who eat organic food and who you know, exercise, sports, and do all the right stuff, and they actually are the customers of these settlers who they oppose politically very fiercely. And again, this kind of ridiculous situation is something that I wanted to explore in the book, and we have one of the main characters, Ronnie, start an olive oil kind of business with a Palestinian there. And that's something that is unusual, a Jew and an Arab joining forces. And I will not give a spoiler what comes up with this endeavor, but maybe you can guess. And then in the middle of everything, you see this camel. And actually, this became a recurring joke in the book, that every now and again, someone comes to the outpost and suddenly sees this camel and says, "Hey, what is this camel?" And they say, "Oh, it's a female camel." And in Hebrew, it's a totally different name. Camel is gamal, and female camel is neaka. So every now and then someone comes and they say, "Oh, it's a camel," and it says, "Oh, it's a female camel. It belongs to Sasson." And actually, Sasson, the characters of Sasson, is not a character that we know anything about anywhere in the book, except for being the owner of the female camel. And actually, this is also a female camel. And I was told the same thing, but not about Sasson. And then you have the kids, you have the people. I mean, so far I just showed you the landscapes and the places and the houses, but of course you have the people and you have the kids. And one of these kids came up to me. I actually secretly photographed because it was Friday night and I wasn't supposed to use my phone, but I photographed them, and then one of them came to me and asked me who I was, and I told them my name, and they said, "How old are you?" I said, "I'm 41. I was 41 at the time. It was a while ago." And he said, "Whose grandfather are you?" That's what he said. And now this is actually taken from a different outpost. These are what we call the Hilltop youth. The kind of the more violent, the more political and ideological, I would say, settlers, young people, sometimes very young teenagers who are kind of lost, and they carry out a lot of violent things like cutting the olive trees that I mentioned before, and sometimes worse offenses. This particular place, you can see me there writing down notes. I was there as doing a story for Haaretz newspaper about them. This was just one of those places that was in constant cat and mouse with the authorities. They would come, they would stay for a few days, the army would come and drive them away, they would come back, and so on and so forth. And this guy here is a Breslever. That's, again, the book. Okay, I want to say something about the settlements, which is one of the things that I learned in my research and in writing the book, was the variety, the different types of settlements and settlers. And sometimes within the same settlement, you see different strands of Judaism, for example, of religion. And this specific Breslever, one of their beliefs is going out to nature and becoming one with God, not in synagogue, but going out to nature and speaking with God. And this guy is doing that. By the way, this here is the settlement which is kind of across the wadi, the stream from Tkoa, and it's called Nukdim. And this is where the minister, well, he's not a minister now, but he used to be a minister, Avigdor Lieberman. He's still a politician. With his movement, they won 7 seats last week in the elections. He lives around here. And this is me trying to blend in the weekend when I was there, you know, wearing the kippah. I didn't really wear it every day, but and reading the newspaper, which is the settler newspaper. And all of this is the research that is not on the ground. I mean, what I showed you so far, it was me going out there and meeting the people and seeing the things with my own feet and walking around. And this is all the kind of academic or library research, books, videos, newspapers. They have a lot of great weekly newspapers where I got a lot of information, and of course information about olive oil, about I mean, part of the book is in New York, in Wall Street, so all of that. And this, which is the last slide or the one before last, is the kind of culmination of all that research. And this is the map of the fictional settlement that is based on that settlement that I showed you. It's a map of actually an early version of the map. I think some of the characters have changed, but basically all these are trailers where people live, and you have their names, and then you have the synagogue here, which is also the kindergarten in the mornings, and then you have the playground that I mentioned before, and here you have Sasson. Where is the? I don't see the camel here, but it should be around. This is the water tower on the way in. This is where the army stays, which is another part of the story. The army that protects the settlers, but also needs to drive them out sometimes. You have the horse mentioned here, and the dogs, and the fields here, and so on. And then I'm back home in Tel Aviv, the sun is already shining and rising, and I start writing. And that's basically the story. And I think I'll do stop share so we can see me on the screen. Thanks.
Thank you. I think for some people, that's their first trip ever into the West Bank. According to our poll, half of you have been there and half of you have never been there. So you took us on a virtual tour. So and you were talking about your book. So people, I'm going to open up the chat so you can start chatting questions to me directly or to everybody in the group, and we'll get started with our Q&A part. My first point was those of you who have come with CSP or traveled with us in 2017 know that half our group went to the West Bank on our trip. We spent the morning in Bethlehem in Aida refugee camp, which was fascinating, and in the afternoon we went up to Kfar Etzion, and we walked on Derech HaAvot, the path of the fathers, by some of these settlements with Aryeh Ruttenberg, Bible in hand, showing us why many people live in the West Bank because of its connection to the deep connections to the Jewish tradition and our stories. I think it's very hard to understand the tension, the challenge, the beauty, and the polarity of what you discussed without going there. So thank you for taking us there in the book, and thank you for taking us on this tour. And if you go to Israel and it's safe, you should go and see what's there. And we'll get there in a second. The other thing I want to mention was one of our past speakers was Elias Cohen, who's a settler, but he's a poet, and he's a left-wing poet, but he's a settler. So there's there's much more complexity going on in the West Bank than most people understand. Regarding the book, the way I read it, and I recommend you all read it. It is an opus, very much like Meir Shalev, who writes about early Israel. This is contemporary Israel with many characters, many plots that weave together, and some great subplots that we'll get to. I call it like MASH meets Catch-22, and it's been described as a wry satire about like a comic settlement saga. So that's some of the quotes about Maleh Hermesh. My question is, how much time did you actually spend in the community and before you really sat down to write?
I actually remember the first day I went there was January 1st, 2008. I mean, it's easy to remember. And the day the book was published was January 1st, 2013. I know January 1st is not a date that you publish things in America, but in Israel, it's a normal day. So it was actually 5 years between my first visit and the publication of the novel. The first visit was to a friend of mine, Ori Elon, who lives in Tkoa, the same settlement. And he actually is one of the writers of Shtisel, if you know it. It's a great show. It's on Netflix. And he is also the son of Benny Elon, rest in peace, who was a member of the parliament, of the Knesset, and one of the leaders of the settlement, of the settlers. So I started by visiting friends and them taking me around and showing me around. And then I would go, I would say weekly. And then I forged this connection that I talked about with a place where I could actually stay. And then I actually received a scholarship that you also mentioned in my biography to live in Berlin for a year. And actually, it was a blessing for me to actually take the time off and go a bit further and have the perspective to write from afar. And then I came back and again started meeting and going. So I would say, I mean, the facts are that all in all, it was a 5-year period between the first visit and the publication. And I would also mention that I was talking about the versatility, the variety of different settlements, and that area where I went to is Gush Etzion, is actually, which is near Jerusalem, to the south of Jerusalem, is actually a very moderate, relatively moderate place of settlements. I mean, this is why you will find Elias Cohen there, who is a poet, is a a very moderate poet. But you also have very hardcore areas further north in Samaria, in the Nablus area, the Jenin area. So I would go all over the place, but eventually I settled mainly into this area because they were welcoming to me and I could speak to them.
Were they welcoming? I mean, did you feel welcome there? Were they excited that you were writing a story about them?
So yeah, so
they know who you were.
No, most of them did not, but they were excited when they heard why I came. I mean, they would be very suspicious to begin with, but in these places, in places like Tekoa, the more moderate ones, once you started talking to them, they became really friendly and welcoming. There are other settlements that like I mentioned, in the northern part of Samaria, that I would go and then they would come to me and say, "Who are you and what are you doing?" And I would also always say the truth. I never tried to kind of pretend that I'm someone else. And then they would make a phone call maybe, or even not make a phone call and just tell me, just go. They didn't want to have anything to do with me. They didn't want me to see anything. They just told me to go.
So just to clarify, because some of you have asked questions in the chat, this book and what Assaf is talking about are not like the big settlements like Kfar Etzion. These are outposts, and they're illegal outposts that have they spring up overnight and grow, and they're much smaller, and that's why they look like the pictures that were shown to us, like these crazy Wild West outposts. It's not like a big city that's supported by the government. So it's not Kfar Etzion. It's little outposts that spring up overnight and try to get themselves into the ground and hopefully cannot be removed. So second question, a follow-up question, which is, did you start writing the book with a part of it in mind? For example, when I was reading the book, and again, I have it right here, and I like the map at the beginning, which is based on your the map that you drew. So I don't know if people can see like the whole map with where all the trailers are. So it's a trailer park. It's really trailer park. I love the end of the book. I try not to give away too much, but it's the Purim part, and where they're all dressed in costume, and there's this craziness going on. And I just wanted to read. You have like Pippi ran this way, and the space shuttle ran that way, and Bigfoot another way, and dressed up IDF soldier wanted to, but felt strange about taking on the real IDF soldiers. And Herzl shook his head in disbelief and of the shattering of the dream. And the infant rock band burst into coordinated the Symphony of Howls. And drunk Rambo couldn't. So these people all dressed up in this outpost. It's Purim day, and they're in Purim garb. And something happens, and so you describe them in their costume, but running around doing crazy things. So I'm wondering, what scene did you start with a scene in mind and build the book around it, or did you start from the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, the scene I had in mind was this this playground, because as I showed you in the presentation, it really struck me. I mean, what is this beautiful playground doing in the middle of this place, which is so chaotic and not organized and nothing? And so I came up with this idea of the American donor and the people, and it's a kind of a introduction to the people and to the place. So unusually when I start writing, that's the way I start. I see one scene, I see a place, maybe a character, maybe two, and I don't know much about it more than that. I mean, I knew I was writing about settlements. I knew that I want to write about how they are made and how people live in them and what they think and what they go through. But I didn't know the story. I only had this kind of scene with a playground, and then I usually go on from there, and I usually see maybe 2 or 3 steps ahead. I don't see all the way to the end. So the Purim party, I only got to it when I got to it, when I almost finished writing the book.
There are lots of questions about the outposts, and so let's see, Ari and Henya Aloni ask, the outposts are illegal, so how do they get electricity and water? And I think in the book, you give example of how they get it. And again, I'm going to go back. This is a catch-22. It's funny, but it is real. I mean, I assume that you mentioned the story is based on real people that you've kind of turned into different characters, real events, real locations, and the real evolution of these illegal settlements. So if it's illegal, I guess the good question is, how do they get water and how do they get electricity?
Yeah, I mean, it would sound like I'm selling the book, but really the answer is in the book because, and especially the first few chapters, it really tells this kind of loopy way that the settlers, who are very, very smart, manage to get all these things. So, I mean, I can give an example, but actually it's only an example because there are different ways and each settlement has its different story. But basically, what they do is they would put a trailer on a hilltop without water and without electricity. But then the army is committed to protect them. So the army will send a few soldiers, and then the soldiers would need water. So they will bring a little water tank. And then the settlers will say, okay, let's get another trailer over. So they bring another trailer. And then they ask the soldiers, can we have some water? So they connect a little pipe to the water tank. And then it evolves from there by using all kinds of little loopholes in the law, because there isn't exactly the law there. It's not Israeli law, but you have Israeli citizens, so you have to protect them, and you have to, I don't know, you have to to provide them with stuff, and it's, I mean, you could see it as funny or you can see it as sad, but it's quite crazy the way it works. And I think that the book is really about that. Is about this craziness that manages to happen, to take place, despite all these obstacles that seem impossible to go through, to go over.
Marion wants to know, since you wrote the book in 2013, you got published in 2013 in Hebrew, 2014 in English, have things changed at all in the West Bank? Or is it basically the same? Are there new settlements that spring up just like you outlined in the book, or have things changed? Does it depend on who's in charge in the government?
Not much has changed. It's similar. They keep springing up new ones. The governments that have been in charge since the book was published have been, I think, only right-wing governments who support, or at least have members of them who support the settlements and who try to get budgets and who try to protect them. Also, another very important factor in the last 8 years was Donald Trump, because he was the most supportive president that was ever in the United States, supporting the right-wing governments in Israel and allowing them to do things. Obama, before him, he did, for example, a freeze on building the settlements, and they actually froze for 1 year officially. Actually, that was the time of my research, and actually they were building even then. But all in all, no matter who's in power, and also, by the way, the left-wing governments, they also not only helped, they were the first who created the settlements. And no matter who's the president of the U.S., they're still going on very strong.
Mary Kraft and Jeff Kaufman want to know, aside from limited agriculture, how do the settlers support themselves?
Again, first of all, as you saw in the PowerPoint, they have some agriculture. a lot of them work in Jerusalem. I mean, Jerusalem is kind of at the center of most of the region where you have settlements. Uh, some of them are closer to central cities in Israel, like Kfar Saba, Ra'anana, and other places. So they would work in the city. They would drive. They would be teachers or anything really. Um, work in high tech from home. Um, so you have this this whole variety, mostly from outside of the place itself. The bigger settlements that are really towns and even cities like Ariel or Ma'ale Adumim, they will have the whole array of services and industry even and businesses and stuff like that.
So you published the book in 2013. It comes out in English again in 2014. What was the reaction to the book in Israel and the different segments of Israeli society, right wing, left wing, and settlers? And then how was it received overseas, like in the United States?
So the, the book had a lot of, very pleasant reactions from actually both camps. I was kind of pleasantly surprised. When I started it, my friends told me, don't go into there, don't do it. Everyone will hate you. Everyone will have a problem. No one will be satisfied. And in a way, he was right, because you always have those who complain, those who on the left who do not want to hear anything about the settlers and don't want to read anything about the settlers. And those on the right who will say, oh, he's a lefty, he's just against us and he's making fun of us. And and we don't want to know what he has to say. And you would have those tweets, for example, that really tried to look into every detail and find mistakes. And since I am not religious myself and not a settler myself, although I used a lot of friends like the ones I mentioned and who are settlers and religious to kind of correct my mistakes and make sure that everything is okay, there's still a few mistakes kind of slipped by. So you would have those tweets making fun of my mistakes. But I'll go back to the beginning of my answer, which is, all in all, there was a lot of good reviews in Haaretz on the left, and in Makor Rishon on the right, the different newspapers. And also I think one of the prizes that I won is the Bernstein Prize. It's one of the important annual prizes for fiction. The committee who decided to give me the prize was made up of a very left-wing kind of literature professor, but also another very right-wing and extremely right-wing, a guy called Weiss, who's very extreme. And the fact that these two people got together and decided to give me the prize, I think says that in a way it was accepted kind of all over, basically.
Did you go back to any of these settlements with your book afterwards to give them a copy and see their reaction?
I actually, I got a phone call one day, maybe 6 months after the book was published, and this guy introduced himself and said he was from Tkoa Dalet, which is the outpost that we saw in the pictures before, the inspiration for my research. And I was kind of suspicious, and he said, we would like to invite you to give us a talk, to talk about the book. And I was a little afraid, so I took my editor with me, and we went there. And actually, I was speaking to my editor a few days ago, and we were reminded of it. It was one of the best events I ever did. It was really fascinating. They were really interested. they asked questions. Some of them were critical. Some thought that I didn't get it right. The funny thing that happened there was that in the book, there is a couple that get divorced. And actually, I invented that because it fit my story. But they are loosely based on a couple that I met in my visits. But the guy was a chef, a sushi chef. And and when I got there, they said something like, how did you know that they got divorced or something like that? So eventually they did get divorced, and I just wrote it without knowing.
One of the characters in the book is America, because two of the main characters, Ronnie and Gavi, go to America on adventures. They come here, then they go back to Israel. And I wanted to ask you, since you've lived here, you were a teacher at Chapman University. You told me 2011, and you spent other time, I think, in America. So tell us about your use of America as a character, an important part of the stories of the two most important characters in the.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, yeah, when I heard that I'm doing an event with Orange County, I was really happy. I lived in Orange, the town itself, for a few months. It was only one semester in 2011. America is very important in the story of Israel generally, but specifically in the story of settlements. And the participation of America in the story, it comes in different ways. One way, as you say, is the characters simply go there, which is a kind of a face of being Israeli. One of the things that the book is about Israel at the moment, and young people in Israel at the moment, and different things that they would do. And the two brothers who are the main characters, we follow them from childhood, and they live in the kibbutz, and they grow up, and they go to the army, and they go to Tel Aviv, and they start a business, and one goes religious, and one goes that way and this way. But one of the experiences that many Israelis do is go to America, whether it is to try and make money like Ronnie did, and whether it is just to to move out and get an experience and see the world. So that's one. The biography of the two characters is one way that America comes in, but the more important thing is actually the support, the political support, and the financial support of some Jews to Israel in general, and to the settler movement specifically. And we do get these different kind of connections, the political connections. Also the media, the journalist who reports in the Washington Post, and then the story comes out and kind of reaches the White House, and so on and so forth. So America is indeed very much part of the story.
And there was a question about the craziness in the book about all the different parts of the government who some parts of the government want to get rid of the settlement in your story, like as they do in reality, and some parts of the government support the settlement, and there's always like, we're going to get rid of you, we're not going to get rid of you, we're going to give you water, we're going to take you away, we're going to protect you. Is that in reality what really happens? Is it that crazy out there?
Yes, it is. And this also answers the previous questions about how do they get the water and the electricity if they're illegal. It's because some people in some office in the government will kind of pass kind of a ruling that will allow them to get, or a road to be paved to the settlement, for example. But then it's illegal, so someone else will say, wait a minute, you're not supposed to do that. So and then it goes, there's some demonstration, and it gets to the White House and the president says, listen, you cannot do it. So the government says, okay, we will need to evacuate the settlement. So they send the army to evacuate the settlement. This happens in the book a couple of times, and it happens in reality, and it's indeed exactly that. It's exactly this way, that really one hand will do this, and the left hand will do that, and sometimes they will do it at the same time. And it's really incredible. And again, if you really want to, I think, to understand how it works, I think the book describes it.
You have a lot of characters in this book. In fact, this book is not like a 2-hour movie. If it was made into something, it would be like a Netflix 10 to 12 part series minimum. And the story does not evolve. It's very much like a Meir Shalev book, because you don't know what's going on in this book. You keep finding new things about your characters till almost the end. It's very interesting. I don't know if that's how you wrote this book specifically, or that's how you write generally. But you do have a lot of characters, and so you don't really know who's going to be the main characters for a while, because you read the book and then all of a sudden you'll jump in history and then you'll start focusing on the brothers and they become the main characters.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of challenge characters and a lot of flawed characters. So first, my question to you is, do you identify with any of these characters? Is anybody in this character, in the book, a character that you, in the end, really would hang out with?
I think I identify with all of them. Really, I think all of them have some of me in them, my ideas, my thoughts, my emotions. Even if I'm not a settler and I don't believe in settlements, and I would not be a settler myself, in terms of characters, of course, I like them all. And, it could be Yakir, who's the teenager, who's playing with a video game like I used to do as a teenager. And it could be, the woman, the divorced woman, Shaulit, divorced woman that I mentioned earlier, who's, very far away from me, a religious redhead woman, but still I think there's something in me, in her, and I like her very much. There's something very strong about her. And then you will have the brothers who are really opposites. They are really different from each other. Ronnie is this macho Israeli achiever, overachiever. He makes lots of money, but before then he's a basketball player, and he goes to the best army unit, to the commando, of course, to the elite unit, and he goes to Tel Aviv and succeeds a lot. But then there's something about him which is a little over the top, and maybe he's on the verge of falling. And then Gabi, his brother, is a total opposite. He's very gentle. He's someone who is being led, not a leader himself like his brother. And he really never knows, what to choose and what to do, and kind of rolls on. But again, I think, you said they are flawed. I think everyone is flawed, and I think flawed characters are probably a sign of a authentic book, I would say.
But the main characters seem stuck. I think they're both, certainly the two brothers and other characters, are trying to change. In fact, many of the characters end up in this settlement that you focus on in your book, trying to get away and start a new life in different ways. Which the question is that how you saw the settlers or these settlers? However, they can't seem to get unstuck. I mean, I don't want to ruin the book for anybody, but try, and whatever their flaw is always comes back. And so the question I have for you is this a commentary on the human condition, or is this a commentary on the Israeli condition?
I think, first of all, definitely the two brothers arrive there as a kind of circumstance, as you say. But some other characters are there by choice, like Otniel Assis, who's the starter, the founder of the settlement. I think, in a sense, it's both the human condition, the Israeli condition. I think something in Israel, in Israeliness, in the Israeli condition that I was trying to kind of tap on was the violence in Israeli society. And I think that some of this violence, I mean, you have violence everywhere, of course. Always when I talk about this violence in talks in America, I've been told that, you have your violences and your, neighborhoods and this and that and differences in society. But I think there is something in the occupation that breeds violence and makes an Israeli who is less sensitive and maybe prone to kind of lose his mind in a way, in a violent way, like Gabi does sometimes, and we won't go too much into telling or giving away parts about Gabi, but so that's, I think, something that I was trying to portray in a sense.
So for those of you who do read the book, there is a lot of, because the settlers are religious, there's a lot of references to the Parsha of the week, to the holidays. And I'd asked you when we spoke yesterday if you grew up religious, and you answered no, but you did know that had to be an element of it. And so you got that from other people you spoke to. So I just want to know that when you read the book, people, you will see a lot of Jewish religious and references to what's going on in the religious world at the time, holidays and Parshiot. And I thought that was made the story. I mean, this whole story can't really happen in many places in the world. It's just such an Israeli story because of the settlement concept, because of the West Bank concept, because of the Arab-Israeli concept, because of the Jewish concept. And that's what makes it quite an interesting read. So we're really out of time. Let me ask two more questions. One is, so we have lots of great readers here who like to read contemporary Israeli fiction. Do you have any writers that you recommend for us to read that we have, or to meet that we haven't met already? I mentioned some of the people who we've hosted.
I usually, my first recommendations are exactly the people that you either already had, like Sayed Kashua and Edgar Keret, or we'll have next month, which is Meir Shalev, which is one of my favorites of the little older generation than me. Sayed, I think, is very important because he's an Israeli Arab, and his position and his identity is really fascinating to read. But there are lots of good writers. I really, I mean, if I can, I shouldn't do this, but if I can recommend a TV show, a Netflix show, I would again mention Shtisel, which is, I guess some of you probably know it already, but there's a new season now on Netflix, and I think it's an exciting show about ultra-religious Jews in Jerusalem. But otherwise, if you haven't read Edgar Keret or Sayed Kashua, then go for that.
Last question. Tell us what you're working on now. I mean, you have a band. You did a video game. You've written many books. You write articles. I don't know if you're still writing articles for different magazines or newspapers, but what are you working on right now? What's your newest?
Well, actually, today, this evening, before I got on, I finished an article. I don't do many. I do very few, maybe a couple a year. But I just wrote one for a Swedish magazine. A guy from a Swedish magazine called me and asked me to write about the year of COVID in my personal and national. So I do that from time to time. My main two projects at the moment are a novel about the place where I grew up, which is a village called Motza Elit outside Jerusalem, a small village, and a group of friends loosely based on myself and three very close friends, and following them through the years from the age of 10 to the age of almost 50, and also talking about the place, which is an important but not very famous place in terms of Zionist milestones. So that's one project, and the second project is a TV show that I'm doing with director Joseph Cedar, who made Before and Footnote and Our Boys on HBO. And we're working on the story of Exodus, the real story of the ship that came in 1947 from France, from Europe, carrying Holocaust survivors from Europe into Palestine at the time, and was then sent back to all the way back to Germany, actually. So we're working on that. A very interesting, fascinating, but very difficult to crack. But we're working on it.
Thank you for spending time with us so late in Tel Aviv. We really appreciate your insight. And if you haven't read The Hilltop or other books by our guest Assaf Gavron, you can read them in English. I see Philip Sapiria is there. Hi, Philip. That's Barb Zwart's brother. And he's somewhere probably, I don't know whether he's in a vacation house or in New York, because I can't tell with his background, but it's always nice to have Philip with us. Anyway, but thank you for sharing your insight into this book. It's a great read. I still think that one of the last scenes with the chaos during the Purim party, it was just one of the funniest things I've read. So, it's a tragic comedy, and then I would say the character who comes out the best in the whole book is probably Othniel. And if we had more time, I'd ask you where these names came from, because there's so many different names, and you play with the names, and then they've changed their names, and a lot of creativity.
Yes.
But the Purim scene really is one of my favorites. It's such a farce. It's so funny. So I invite everybody to read these books, to read the books from our other authors. We've had Ayelet Gundar Goshen, Dorit Rabbanyan, Edgar Keret, and we had Ron Leshem. We're going to have Meir Shalev. So if you haven't read The Blue Mountain or Pigeon and a Boy, you really have to read those. And you have 1 month. I don't know how many. I have this copy of your book, and it must just be a condensed copy, because I was going blind rereading it last night at 1 o'clock in the morning. It's very small letters, but or else I'm getting very old now. And it's about 448 pages. I think it's way more than that if it was in like bigger font, but it's worth reading this. But you really should. It'll make a difference when you meet the author if you read the book. So Meir Shalev is coming, and you should definitely read The Blue Mountain, and you should read Pigeon and a Boy. And then you should join us for some music on Sunday with Salon Bendosa. And then a lot of programs. It's a very busy next 2 weeks, a lot going on in Israel. So we'll be continuing doing programs. And Assaf, hopefully we'll get to meet you when we come to Israel, maybe this October. That's our plan.
I would love to. Thank you very much, Ari. And thank you, everyone. I'm seeing the very kind messages that you're sending. So thanks a lot for joining, and I hope to see you soon.
And I'll also end by saying what's amazing about Israel is you get to read these books, which are great books. And reading a book that relates to something that we know of, because we know Israel, we've been to Israel, we know people who live in Israel. There's a lot of Jewish stuff in these books. They make it closer to us than reading other great literature. So this is great literature. It's very close to us, but then meet the authors. I know for me, it's amazing to talk to Assaf about his work, and I hope you've enjoyed this. And thank you all for your great questions. Keep them coming. And I look forward to seeing you guys on Thursday of this week for our program in commemoration of Yom HaShoah. And then we have a lot of programs coming up. So take care, be safe, make sure you get vaccinated. Don't go out to baseball games with 48,000 people. Just a thought recommendation. Just who knows, but have a great day. And it's good to see you guys after our Pesach break. And Pat Hutt, you're coming to Israel with us. So yeah, we're going to drop you off at Tekoa so you can meet some of these people. We'll give you Assaf's book, and you can get it signed by the people, and just say, which one of you is Gabi? Which is Roni? Is there an Othniel here? Okay. Take care, everybody. Nice to see you. Nice to meet you, new people. And Philip Sapiria, and if Barb's here, Barb Zwart. And That's it. I'm packing my bags. I'm getting ready to go visit Assaf in just a few months. Take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.